Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demas. Uncommon sense in current times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm real excited to be here with Lana Silk. She is the CEO of Transform Iran. She's been on the show before as we talked about a lot of what's happening in Iran from a Christian perspective, from seeing a lot of transformations in the underground church. Lana is a passionate advocate for the Iranian people. Born in Iran, now based in the U.S., she brings spiritual and social transformation through the gospel, leadership development, and humanitarian outreach. Under her leadership, Transform Iran supports the underground church and amplifies the voice of Iranian Christians facing persecution. So obviously, we have a lot happening in Iran right now with both the Israeli attacks and then the U.S. Recent attacks as well. So there's a lot going on there with the people. So thank you so much for being on the show. I greatly appreciate you taking your time being here.
Thank you, Peter. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So most of the shows that I've seen and listening to you talk, and whether you're on CBN or wherever else, I see like it kind of always ends the conversation with the idea that the conflict ends up saying something like the regime does not represent the people. But there is actually, I know there's probably part of the Iranian population that do support the current regime. Maybe it's fear, belief, or pride. Why is it that people are still supporting this regime, since most of the people don't seem like they are?
They are the minority that support the regime, and that will be probably a religious affiliation where they still hold a very strong respect for and affiliation to Shia Islam and the ideology of their government, which essentially is to carry that revolution, as Khomeini called it, to the ends of the world, including the objective of wiping out Israel.
So I know, well, the westernization of Iran basically ended in 1979 with the revolution. And I started thinking about it, and probably the only people that can really remember what it was like before this would be in their 60s. Like most of the last two generations don't remember that part of it at all. So probably even the last three generations now I think about it. So do you think that the average Iranian person truly understands and wants a Western style freedom that we imagine, or is there still like a different or cultural religious version of freedom that the Iranian population as a whole holds right now?
Well, you're right to say that there will be less people now in Iran who would be thinking back to what it was like before, and then with that also wanting that, because it wasn't a perfect system before. There was poverty, there was a split society with some very wealthy, affluent people, and then others who were struggling. And really, Ayatollah Khomeini rode that wave of encouraging people who felt that they were being misrepresented or underrepresented by their government and not looked after properly by their government. And that was his whole rhetoric, as Islam is merciful and just and will go back to purity. People didn't like the extreme Western influence, the sort of promiscuity almost that they would associate with that. A lot of people objected to the fact that the Shah made it not law for the women to have to wear the hijab. They saw that as modest and wanted to bring it back. So some people will be very few people will be thinking, let's go back to that. But a lot of people now will have no real sense of that, or people may not even be thinking of that in positive light. But instead, what they know is what they have today isn't good. And a lot of the young people, so you're right, everyone under the age of 46 and really under the age of probably 56 will only have memory of, those who were 10 when it changed, will only have memory of this regime. So their connection to freedom isn't what it was like before this regime. Their connection to freedom is what they've seen on media from the West, because it's illegal for them to access it, but they do, and they're constantly looking for, particularly American media, and even if it's just movies and TV programs and what that represents to them, which is a different kind of life that they would like to have. And it's the hope of the promise of something. I don't think any of them would be able to really tell you in detail what that looks like, but they want freedom from what they live in today.
So the Iranian underground church is growing rapidly, and we've talked about that. Is there conversations within that church with what's happening now of how they can help heal the people, lead the people, and if so, how does that look? Because obviously the church is an underground church right now, and there's still going to be a lot of persecution to it culturally, even if there was a regime change, or even if the regime decides just to back off a little bit. There seems to be something, but there seems to also be a prime opportunity to lead. Is there conversations on that, and what does that look like for the church?
Yes, at Transform Iran, we have been actively preparing for that. We have looked at what has happened historically in other contexts where an oppressed people suddenly had freedom and the church wasn't ready. I mean, we only need to look at the fall of communism, or even in Japan, like when suddenly an opportunity presented itself and the church wasn't ready to do something about it. And we want to make sure that's not going to be the story in Iran. So there's been a lot of preparation, practical preparation, even thinking about what a new government might look like, what new education systems might look like, infrastructure. We have people in business who are ready to go and establish good businesses. So real preparation is going into it. And of course, the church to be ready. Now, we have an excellent network already to support a freer church, and that would be our digital church network, where quite likely millions connect to it on and off, but we would say safely 20 to 25,000 people every month are part of that community. And so that's a great start already for an infrastructure that's there, and a digital means by which people up and down the country can freely connect to a church network and learn about the work of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus. A lot of people might be doing that in secret now, or wanting to do it but afraid, and those walls will come down when the regime changes, or when the system changes. Let's say it may be a repentant regime. We don't know. So we are ready. I don't anticipate a lot of persecution to come if there was a regime change, if the current Islamic theocracy was to be replaced with something more secular. The population in and of itself is not anti-Christian. In fact, a lot of them would probably show greater openness and interest in a freer environment. So I think we'll be looking at different challenges than the kind of challenges that we have here in the West, where you have a lot of freedom and comfort, and then you have to make a choice for Jesus in that context.
So, you said that a lot of the people are not anti-Christian, and I understand that, but there is still this idea there, because obviously there's local political strengths, that goes beyond the larger the country regimes. There's going to be local imams or whatever that have a strong influence, regardless of whether there's a regime change. Obviously, that doesn't get wiped out overnight either, and there's years of a brainwashing of certain groups of the population. Even if they don't have the national control, it seems like there still could be enough local pressure. Is that possible too, what I'm talking about? And is it possible to overcome that relatively quickly, or do you see it more of a divide, almost kind of like what happened with India, when they got their freedom?
Yeah, good question. It really does feel very much like the people who are the kind of person that you'd be thinking that would cause persecution are the people that are affiliated with the government now, or even employed by the government. So even though their own ideology isn't going to change overnight, their power to cause any real harm will. The real sort of weapon at hand for people like that today is to turn people into the government. When there's no government to turn them into that is going to prosecute them, to imprison them, harass them, torture them, then that whole world goes away. Now, those people individually could cause persecution, and that absolutely, I don't think that's ever going to go away for any of us. We should be almost offensive as Christians with our faith Jesus for us. And there should always be some sort of resistance to the light that is challenging the darkness. But I don't know that the kind of persecution that people are experiencing today is going to stay. But yeah, it will be a gradual change for sure. And for a whole country to shift course and for us to see this sort of wider transformation that we're really praying for and hoping for, that is going to be a matter of time.
And for those of us in the West who are used to kind of this McDonaldization of, I want something, I want it now, and if I don't get the change immediately, that seems like that would be very frustrating for the people of the West to support Iran, considering that any change is going to be gradual with it. So do you see us kind of falling away, or worse, going in there and saying, well, we're going to force it to happen in another direction? Can you see that also being an obstacle for the Iranian church?
I don't see, I mean, I would be surprised if a Western force, I mean, really, the only viable candidate here is America, would come in and by force make change. I think Americans have done that before and seen that it hasn't been very effective. So I can't see that happening in Iran. We're being surprised every day by events. Rule anything
I'm
out.
holding you to everything you say, by the way, a week from
That's
now.
right. I'm predicting the future. So I don't anticipate that to be the case. It's good, interesting to talk about whether Western interest or empathy would fade away as things don't seem to be fixed overnight. We've seen slow, difficult changes in countries like Iraq and Syria. Of course, Afghanistan had a whole different journey. And then, we talk about fatigue, don't we? Compassion fatigue. I've heard that phrase used before, where people
Right.
just can't carry a burden for a very long time. Like they just get tired of carrying it. So I can see that happening with Iran. The sort of it's sort of trendy now to talk about Iran. It's all happening. It's an exciting church dynamic. It's an exciting mission field. Will people feel the same way in a few years, 5 years, 10 years? I don't know. I do think, though, that Iran has the potential to surprise us with how quickly and positively things will turn, because there's a much bigger impetus for it, even from within. There's a larger Christian community that Iran has than, for example, we had in Iraq or Syria. And it's a very persecuted community that's been ready for a change and preparing for a change. And there's also a very large community of unbelievers who are also keen to see change in their country. And for them, that means democracy and freedom and equality and tolerance. So again, that's positive by and large. So again, I'm not holding
Right. Yeah.
anything solid, but I would expect Iran to surprise us.
Khomeini said something, and I don't know if I got the quote exactly correct, but it's like something like, "Let this land burn if Islam spreads." So it seems to me that the regime can see total war, even if they lose, as a path to spiritual victory. That seems kind of concerning, considering we're trying to talk about a ceasefire, we're trying to talk about talks. Is that seen to be the attitude of the regime change, even though it is not of the people, but does that seem to be the attitude of the regime?
Yes, exactly right. I'm not anticipating a long-term peaceful solution for things to stand as they are now. Israel and Iran have different objectives here as far as what success looks like, what peace looks like, what victory looks like. Israel is talking about eliminating a threat to their sovereign nation, and a real threat. It cannot happen for Iran to become a nuclear power, and Israel
Right.
did something about that. So, from Israel's perspective, victory looks like inability for Iran to attack them in the way that they thought they could, and to sort of weaken them in that way. From Iran's perspective, victory looks like an annihilation of Israel. at any cost, a cost to their own people, as you've mentioned before. And more recently as well, people have taken, just this week, there was an announcement on state TV that it would be absolutely acceptable for half of the Iranian population to be wiped out if that meant the supreme leader could be protected and Iran could continue. I mean, they're not even pretending to be wanting to protect their country. You know, leaders like the leaders of Israel have an interest in defending their people and protecting their people, and that is a consideration when they go to war. They want to think about what the impact of that would be on their people, how they would protect and defend them. Iranian leaders are not thinking that way. Their people are not a concern. They have an objective, a religious, ideological objective to achieve, and they're not going to stop with any kind of potential ceasefire or negotiation. All of this, in my mind, is just games and strategy and a longer term play.
I know I got a chance to talk with Moshe Sharon from Israel a while back, and he used the phrase that there's a Muslim phrase that lying is the salt of words, that sometimes you have to lie. And part of that negotiation, I asked him, how do you negotiate with someone that you know is in that situation? So it sounds like, these talks of ceasefires and these talks of peace and no more kind of the nuclear, well, we're only doing it for energy. And even though, I mean, the logic behind it is unreal. So it sounds like to me that you would be concerned if there was just a ceasefire and a temporary peaceful solution, that it's only kicking the can down the road. Am I correct in reading that right?
100%. And if anything, making things worse down the road. You know, if the government now was to stay as they are in Iran and continue business as usual, it will for sure be worse for Iranians in the short term. You know, there's this sort of heightened paranoia now amongst the leadership of Iran. They're looking for spies. You know, Israel was extremely precise and effective in the way that it acted this last week to 10 days. And the government wants to know, how did they know where everyone was, where everything was? How did they produce the results that they did? And that, of course, leads them to look internally for the traitors. And people are being brought in right now for questioning and interrogation. They're suspicious of people. They've increased their surveillance and monitoring of people's communications. Of course, we had an internet blackout for multiple days. They wanted to stop people contacting the outside world. Some of that would have been for sharing intel. Some of that was because they didn't like that people were sharing images of themselves celebrating as Israel bombs were landing in their country. I mean, that's terrible PR for the Iranian government.
Right.
So it's just going to get worse for the people in Iran if this government was to stay unchecked as they are now. And no, long term, I don't see peace.
So the Iranian church then, how do they see the role of Israel? Because Israel, you've had this propaganda for many years that Israel is the enemy. You have, and yet the Bible talks about Israel being a blessing. So how is the church, I guess, how are they handling that concept of, do we bless Israel, who is also attacking us in order to protect, I mean, it's like a flow chart that I can't get to the end of. So how does the church kind of feel about this as a whole?
Well, I think the good thing is that we have the truth on our side as a church. We know that God loves Israel, that we should want and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So I think generally as believers, that's an obvious answer for us in terms of the role of Israel and our relationship with the Israelites. But even beyond that, as Christians, of course, we know that love is important. We love our enemies even and pray for those who persecute us. That's the command of Jesus. So a Christian would approach this whole thing completely differently. And there's no question that the government ethos of wanting death over Israel and destruction over Israel is not carried by any of the Christians without exception, and also not carried by a large number of the general Muslim or agnostic, probably now Iranian population either.
So I know that military intervention has been necessary. I understand and I agree with that. Is there a fear that that either our involvement in particular, or again Israel's continuing involvement to eradicate the nuclear capabilities, and or possibly do a regime change. I know they're saying they don't want that, but there's that possibility of it regardless. And I know there's some inside our government that would advocate for it. Do you think there's a danger, though, that the involvement can basically turn this revival into a rebellion, or make martyrs out of the militants that are there? Is there a danger that it could almost backfire in such a way?
Um, yeah, that's a very complex one to really pin down. The the question of whether we will be seeing militants turn martyrs, I think that's a given, whether the West is involved or not. This call to jihad carries on, and there is a glorification of martyrs in Iran for people who pay with their lives for this great cause. So whether the US or Israel are involved directly or not, Iran is.
Right.
So Iran is going to continue on their agenda no matter what. There's a very sensitive fine line here between helping the Iranian people, um, adding some muscle to what the Iranian people want to see happen, dislodging a government that is oppressive and cruel to their own people, and interfering and meddling. And it's that I don't think there is a perfect solution to that. And there are always going to be people who will accuse Western countries of interfering, and that line is in a different place for everyone. Already, there are people in the country who are saying that even though they don't love their regime, even though they don't love the struggle of life, everyday life for them in Iran, they're really quite angry with the fact that outsiders, so it doesn't even matter who it is, in this case it's America and Israel, have interfered in the affairs of their nation and attacked their own nation, and that they have a problem with that. As a matter of principle, they are the minority, but there are people who feel that way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a sort of a gray scale here. At
Right.
what point is it help, and at what point does that help become interference? And there will be a lot of disagreement where that line is drawn. The fact is that the Iranian people tried and failed a few years ago in the wake of Mahsa Amini's death to overthrow their own government. They tried previously, but it had been less in a large scale. It was quite a large movement in 2022 when they took to the streets. So they know they can't do it by themselves. And a lot of people will say that they welcome the help. In fact, I've spoken to people who literally said, one person was telling me that I was asking about his family back in Iran. I said, how are they doing? There's a mixture of Christians and Muslims in his family. And so it was very interesting for me to see their different reactions. And he said the most recent reaction that he had from his family, who have been dislodged, they had to evacuate their homes, they're living in different places now, so they really are in an unsettled place, and the concept of war is very much, it's an everyday experience for them. But this family were most distraught when the bombings ceased. Uh, their reaction was, well, hang on, you've started it, now finish it. Don't
Right.
leave us like this now. So that you can see there's a whole range of emotions from people
Right.
in how they react to this now.
That's yeah, that's interesting. All right, we're out of time, and I know again you're super busy. So, but I want to ask this one last question because I think it's probably the most important for the people that are listening to this right now, outside of the education piece of this, which is, what do you think is the one myth of the Iranian people or of this war that Western Christians need to repent of believing?
Oh, that's a great question, Peter. I would say still the myth is that the Iranian people, by and large, are in support of their religion. They are lovers of Islam, and they support the activities of their government. That is absolutely false. The vast majority of Iranians are themselves victims of the actions of their government and want the regime to change. And a lot of them have paid dearly to see that happen and failed in the process, not just Christians, but Muslims too. So they are a suffering people rather than an angry people.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate all that you're doing, especially for our brothers in Iran, but also just for the country itself. I've had a friend that I've had who was actually was a bodyguard for the Shah, who escaped here in the in '79 after everything happened. Was a cook for our restaurant for a while, so I've known him for many years, and the people of Iran are absolutely wonderful. The ones I know are amazingly kind and just some really good people. So I thank you so much for all you're doing there, and God bless your work.
Thank you, Peter.